Live service games. A three-word phrase that has caused some massive division and vitriol in the gaming community. A three-word phrase that has simultaneously generated obscene amounts of money and utterly defiled beloved IPs. I don't think there's been a genre of game that has caused such a large collective eye roll in the history of gaming. Now, to be fair, I typically don't mind live service games if they make sense. I had a huge Destiny 2 phase. I'm also in the minority that loves grinding through Diablo 4. But what does it take to create a live service game that both satisfies the needs of consumers and proves to be a fruitful business plan for publishers? To be honest, I don't think there are many that have successfully towed this line outside of Fortnite, and yet there have been countless attempts. Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League attempts to walk this high wire while juggling a beloved and unique IP with massive expectations, and falls flat on its face. From clumsy writing, repetitive gameplay, and what could be considered the exact opposite of fan service, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League might be considered 2024's first massive flop. And yet, I still had tons of fun with it. Yes, my opinions on this game are just as divisive as its reception. Is Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League the next evolution of gaming? Absolutely not. Is it as offensively bad as Reddit is making it out to be? Well, I'm not so sure. I'm Dirty C, and if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing, liking this video, and commenting down below, as this will only bring you prosperity and fortune, and make me feel real nice. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League seems to be universally hated, but I still had fun. Let's talk about it. Warning, we will be discussing late game spoilers, so skip ahead to the next timestamp to avoid them.
Just a quick question. What's with the frickin' shark?
I would be happy to introduce myself.
That won't be necessary, King Shark.
Our journey begins with the titular Suicide Squad being offered an incredibly raw deal by the manipulative and sadistic Amanda Waller. If King Shark, Harley Quinn, Captain Boomerang, and Deadshot play along with Waller's suicide mission, they'll receive reduced sentences. After having bombs implanted in their skulls, our team of miscreants is sent on an attempt to thwart Brainiac's invasion of Metropolis and kill the Justice League, who have fallen under Brainiac's mind-controlling influence. The story setup here, in my opinion, is actually pretty cool. I love a good anti-hero story, and love it when the bad guys win in comics. But given such an epic alley-oop of a setup, Rocksteady somehow manages to miss the dunk due to faulty pacing, questionable plot decisions, and a story that feels simultaneously prolonged and rushed in all the wrong places. None of our characters are given any kind of background or proper introduction, and there's literally no setup given for Brainiac's invasion. Maybe Rocksteady thought that anyone interested in this game would already be familiar with the lore, but I found this kind of shotgun start to be extremely jarring. Normally, I like being thrown right in the middle of the action, but in this game, you're really not. You still sit through a long sequence of cutscenes and tutorials until you're actually cut loose to cause some mayhem in Metropolis, thus making this quick story setup entirely ineffective in terms of player experience. The jarring storytelling technique is prevalent throughout the duration of the story, with big emotional moments coming out of nowhere. At one point, we're forced to dive into the psyche and insecurities of the Suicide Squad for the entirety of a late game mission. We're also meant to have an emotional moment of closure with Harley Quinn in the late game. These big emotional moments just come out of nowhere, and put up against the zany hijinks of our lovable idiots kind of dialogue angle present throughout the game, these moments don't have any impact and just seem out of place.
I thought we were going for the hat trick.
One of the biggest controversies surrounding Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League is how the writing treats certain legendary characters. Now, clearly, the game is literally called Kill the Justice League, so you know that some of your favorite heroes are gonna get murked. Personally, I thought this was awesome. Like I said, I love it when the bad guys win occasionally. It creates some seriously high stakes and makes the drama of the situation so much more tense. I don't have a problem with the ultimate fate of some of the characters in the game, but what really falls short in this game is how they go about bringing this fate upon them. Every single boss fight follows the same storytelling formula. Our anti-heroes obtain some kind of random scientific MacGuffin to power up their guns, and are now able to just shoot the Justice League. That's it. Seriously. They just shoot Superman. Frankly, this is just stupid, and is a huge missed opportunity to make some of these boss fights insanely epic. That being said, they do try to do different things with the Batman boss fight, but it's too little an effort and really just feels tacked on in an attempt to try to make this game interesting. Ultimately, the story of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League just feels like an obligation and is ultimately a waste of time. It's really only held together by the stellar dialogue writing and the written dynamics between our titular characters. Some of the writing in this department did legitimately make me laugh out loud.
Don't sweat it. Batman doesn't kill people. Are you okay?
But dialogue is only one part of story writing, and it just wasn't enough to hold this tall tale together. The gameplay loop in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is pretty standard for a live service looter shooter. It all revolves around gunning down wave after wave of enemies in order to level up your characters and get better loot. The combat is wild and quickly becomes extremely chaotic and somewhat messy at times. That is, until you get a firm and confident understanding of the controls. This is where the game becomes really fun. Guns feel snappy and have some weight to them. Traversal and parkour feel smooth once you get the hang of it. One of the most unique and satisfying mechanics is what's called shield harvesting. Instead of retreating and resting when your shield depletes a la Destiny or Halo, players must melee strike enemies when prompted in order to regenerate shields. I've seen that some outlets think this mechanic is kind of annoying, but I personally loved it. It's another dynamic to the flow state of combat and adds a hefty amount of drama when risking your last revive to regenerate your shield. At first, I really thought the gunplay would get old quick, and at the beginning, I quickly became frustrated with the camera controls and the overall sensory overload that is the UI. At any given time, your screen is covered with random flashing lights and icons that it becomes legitimately challenging to find the mission icon you're supposed to be following. Frankly, this was a minor inconvenience that I eventually got used to, but it was incredibly annoying at first. The early hours of the gameplay will feel frustrating to almost everyone. It does take some time to get adjusted to the flow of traversal for each character and the awful attack on your senses that is the UI. But once you get used to it, it becomes tons of fun to mow down hundreds of enemies. But where the game gets stupidly mind-numbing is in its mission design. There's only a handful of missions in this game that you will play over and over and over again ad nauseum. Off the top of my head, I can only think of 2 unique story missions that occurred throughout the 13 or so hours that was my story playthrough. Every other mission consisted of go to this place, defend these points on the map for 3 waves, rinse and repeat. They try to switch up the formula by putting restrictions on how you kill enemies, such as only kill enemies with grenades, or kills only count if they're done with critical hits, but this only served to make the game more annoying than interesting. For me, the mission design was probably the most disappointing aspect of the game. These type of point defense missions felt old 6 years ago, and to see them brainlessly recycled over and over again in the middle of what was an acceptably gripping story just made the experience tedious. Any modicum of drama or tension that was created during the story was immediately dashed by boring and uninspired mission design. And there's evidence that this didn't have to be the case. There's an amazing mission revolving around Batman at the beginning of the game. There's another late game mission that was unique and held some emotional weight. Clearly, Rocksteady had some good ideas to begin with, but it seems like they were crushed when trying to cram this IP into the looter-shooter games as a service framework. When the guns are blazing and you're flying around the map taking out hordes and hordes of foes, building up combos, pulling off shield harvests, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League feels really good and can make the disappointingly mind-numbing mission design easy to forget. It's easy to watch hours melt off the clock when you find yourself in this flow state of mayhem. There are some design decisions in this game that make absolutely no sense to me. The biggest being character design and progression. When leveling up your character, each has their own skill tree, but the skill trees for each respective anti-hero are more or less the same. With our ragtag group of miscreants that display their own identity and personality, there is nothing in the actual gameplay and design that reflects their uniqueness. Each player has their own traversal attack that's just a fancy way of damaging multiple enemies at once, and their own suicide strike, which is just a fancy insta-kill with its own unique animation. Most disappointingly, each hero's ultimate attack is literally identical to every other character. Furthermore, it's not even cool. It's an extremely generic time stop skill that freezes all enemies for 30 seconds. Ultimately, aside from each character's traversal technique, there is nothing in the game that makes these characters distinguishable from one another. They play essentially the exact same way and are nearly identical except for how they look and talk and move. This just feels like such a huge missed opportunity to me. After putting in so much attention to detail in their dialogue and interactions, Rocksteady seemingly put little effort into making each character feel unique. The environment in which you sow chaos goes similarly underutilized. Metropolis gives off the appearance of this wildly whimsical playground of carnage, but in actuality, it just feels empty and soulless. There is some cool verticality in the environment that creates some pulse-pounding combat moments, but other than that, the layout of the city means absolutely nothing. It just serves as a pretty-looking set piece for the player to look at as they endlessly fly across the map to get to the same mind-numbing missions. But by far, the biggest game design miss is how Rocksteady crafted the endgame. Anyone who's played live service, looter shooter, dungeon crawling games knows that where the real meat of the experience comes in is in the endgame grind. The endgame in this game is so bare bones and so dull that it's likely to have a lot of players asking, what's the point? The endgame consists of 3 missions. That's it. 3 repeatable missions that have you doing the exact same thing you've been doing all story. The exact same mission designs over and over again to collect seasonal loot. As you progress through them, you raise the difficulty that adds new modifiers to the experience, but these modifiers do little to switch up the already exhaustive formula. Now, there are other smaller missions that need to be completed to obtain in-game currency to pay for way into the infamy loot missions, but they are, yup, you guessed it, the same kind of missions you've been playing all game. Now, Rocksteady has announced that they will be constantly updating the post-game experience with different seasonal content and new characters, which I'm all for that. If they're going to be giving away new characters for free and providing more story content, then sure, I'm into it. Furthermore, the way they've stated they'll be handling future content is a step in the right direction. Allowing players to revisit old battle passes and rehash old content is a great idea, and I think is the proper evolution of the live service framework. But given the current reception of the game, it's still shaky as to whether the game is even going to exist long enough to get to that point. Is Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League a great game? Absolutely not. Is it even a good game? I'm not so sure. Is it the horribly offensive dumpster fire that Reddit is making it out to be? No, not at all. It's just kind of there. It just kind of exists, and that's fine. Despite my incessant complaining, I did have fun with the game. In fact, I had a lot of fun. If you're willing to laugh at the story instead of taking it seriously, and just want to turn off your brain and shoot aliens, then this game will scratch that itch. But it might be best to wait for a significant price drop before causing some chaos in the streets of Metropolis. If you've made it this far into the video, you are an absolute legend. If you've subbed already, then you have my unwavering admiration, and if you have not, please consider doing so. I'm Dirty C, and I will see each and every one of you in the next video.